I'm Sarah. Welcome to the show. And I bet you didn't know that Mount Ararat, where Noah and the Ark landed after the flood, is most likely a range of mountains instead of one particular peak. They're located in the eastern part of modern Turkey, near its borders with Armenia and Iran. And that's just one of the things about mountains in the Bible that I bet you didn't know. The Holy Land is filled with mountains and hills, and the valleys, ravines, and gulches that they create. Here's a quick note. There's no difference in the Bible between a mountain and a hill. For us, a hill is significantly smaller than a mountain, but they didn't make that distinction. For them, a mountain is a hill, is a mountain, is a hill, is a mountain. In addition to all the important events that take place on mountains, mountains are used symbolically in the Bible. They are unchanging and so become symbols of permanence and everlastingness. Moses uses this meaning when he speaks of the ancient mountains and everlasting hills in Deuteronomy 33:15. Psalm 92 states, "Before the mountains were born, you brought forth the whole world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God." Mountains are sometimes characterized as being barren and empty, but at other times described as being places of refuge. The vastness of mountains makes them useful poetic descriptions for God's power, such as in Psalm 97:5, which states that the mountains melt like wax before the Lord. God's righteousness is like the highest mountains, and God is more majestic than mountains. Important things tend to happen on mountains. The Dictionary of Biblical Imagery states, "Covenant making, law giving, and covenant renewal occur on mountains that, due to their permanence, stand as memorials to the covenant." Mountains and hills were often used as sites of worship. These are the high places spoken of in the Bible. The vast majority of the time, though, these were sites of pagan worship. That's bad. But that's not the mountain's fault. Mountains are also often places of transcendent experiences, encounters or appearances of the one true God. God speaks to Moses in the burning bush on a mountain. Elijah encounters God on a mountain when he hears the still small voice, as the King James puts it. And the Israelites encounter God at a mountain when God comes with thunder and lightning, and the ground shook and the mountain was covered with smoke. This motif continues in the life and ministry of Jesus. Jesus often teaches on mountain and hillsides, most notably the Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew chapters 5-7. Jesus is transfigured on a mountain, and he ascends to heaven on a mountain. God gives the 10 Commandments to Moses to give to the Israelites on Mount Sinai. That's where they go when they leave Egypt. This is also when God appears to them in a thick cloud and smoke over the mountain, and there's thunder and lightning and earthquakes. Moses goes up the mountain to speak to God, but the Israelites are forbidden to set foot on the mountain. Boundaries are set up so they know to stay away. Mount Sinai is also known as Mount Horeb, and there's also evidence that Mount Paran might be another name for this particular mountain. But Sinai and Horeb are the names most frequently used in the Bible. Because Moses disobeyed God at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the desert of Zin, he isn't allowed to enter the Promised Land. But Moses is allowed to see the Promised Land from the top of Mount Nebo, which is considered by many scholars to be the same as Mount Pisgah. Mount Moriah is the mountain God told Abraham to go to sacrifice Isaac. Of course, God stopped Abraham before he actually killed Isaac and provided a ram for sacrifice instead. No one is quite sure where Mount Moriah is because the names of mountains have changed over time. However, many believe that Mount Moriah is the same mountain as Mount Gerizim. The Samaritans believe them to be the same mountain and have considered it a holy place since ancient times. Mount Gerizim is also one of the 2 mountains, the other being Mount Ebal, that the Israelites stood on in Joshua 8 when they rehearsed the blessings and consequences of obeying or disobeying the law. Mount Gerizim is also where Jotham stands to shout his fable in Judges chapter 9. Staying in the book of Judges, Mount Tabor is the mountain where the Israelite forces led by Deborah and Barak defeated the Canaanite army led by Sisera. You can find this story in Judges chapters 4 and 5. Mount Gilboa is where Israel's first king Saul and his son Jonathan were killed while fighting the Philistines. Mount Carmel was the setting for the showdown between Elijah the prophet and the priests of Baal, found in 1 Kings chapter 18. Spoiler alert, God wins. After the contest, Elijah travels way down south and ends up at Mount Sinai. That's where he encounters God in the still small voice. Jesus often retreated to the mountains to be alone with God and to pray. This reinforces the idea of mountains as remote and away from people and civilization, and also them as places of spiritual encounter. Mount Hermon and Mount Tabor are the two sites generally proposed for the location of the mountain on which Jesus' transfiguration occurs. Mount Tabor is the traditional site, but Mount Hermon's location makes it a strong candidate. The transfiguration occurs right after Peter makes his great confession that Jesus is the Messiah. He makes this confession at Caesarea Philippi. Mount Hermon is close to Caesarea Philippi, and Mount Tabor isn't. Jesus ascended into heaven from Mount Olivet, also known as the Mount of Olives, which is one of the 7 mountains or hills that Jerusalem is situated on. The 7 hills of Jerusalem are Mount Olivet, also known as the Mount of Olives, Mount Scopus, Mount of Corruption, or the Mount of Offense, Mount Ophel, the original Mount Zion, where the Temple Mount is, the new Mount Zion, and the hill on which the Antonia Fortress was built. And finally, I bet you didn't know that Jerusalem isn't only built on mountains, it's surrounded by mountains. So much so that the psalmist can give us this beautiful image from Psalm 125. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, now and forever. Thanks for watching. Hope you had some fun, maybe learned some things. If you have a suggestion for a future show or something you just want to know, leave it in the comments and I'll see what I can do. So until next time, may it never rain on your parade. Bye.